Greetings, friends, and welcome to this edition of Tales from the Tabletop, the video series where I scour the internet and my own personal experiences to bring you anecdotes of adventure, the fun, the funny, the farcical, the teachable moments from Warhammer to D&D and everything in between. And I take my favorite one, and I illustrate it for your listening and viewing pleasure. Thanks so much for joining me again. Let's dig in. Mr. Fish331 writes, I played a game with a small party of 3. We wake up with no memory of who we are or where we came from. First town we come across is a mouseling village. We spend about 20 sessions in and around this town working for them as we slowly discover what happened to us. We learn that a quarter of town went missing a few months before we showed up, and the leader of the town became a recluse and never left the fort. We learn later the leader's name is Lord Gob of Lynn. Okay, weird name, but these are strange people. We break into the fort to discover what is happening and see a goblin sitting on the throne. Gob of Lynn was a goblin with a pendant that disguised the wearer to whatever they wanted, but an 8 or higher can see through it on an intelligence perception roll. So many questions were answered right then and right there. Our next story comes from Fish Slapper Zook. Cool name. And Fish Slapper Zook writes, I've been running Curse of Strahd for the better part of a year at this point. I have one friend who pops in and out of the game at random, because he's a busy dude. So his character is an oddity who does not often appear. The man's name is Parma John, a divination wizard / fighter who uses cheese for his predictions. The man follows the will of the cheese. Parma John, like all puns, the wordplay is equal parts amusing and pain-inducing. So he joined up with the party on their way to Castle Ravenloft for a planned dinner with Strahd himself. And the whole party was understandably nervous. They don't really know a whole lot about him in person. All they know for sure is he is the ruler of this land. He is incredibly dangerous, and he found it funny when the druid tried to poison him upon their first meeting. He has been stalking them ever since. The druid in particular is terrified, and she's going off on a tangent of the horrible things that could possibly be awaiting her during this dinner. So Parma John looks at her through his cheese-filled, cheese-wedge-shaped helmet and states firmly, Cease thy whimpering! The cheese does not will it! We had to take a short break because he said it so seriously and with such conviction that it broke each and every one of us. Even when he is not playing with us, occasionally someone will quote him when a fellow player character is starting to complain. Very first comment from Lord Meme 42 writes, Parma John the Cheese Wizard sounds like an absolute blessing to have at the table. And OP responds, Oh, he is a delight. In that same session, he used his face as a pickaxe to help tear down a wall that was blocking the party's way into the catacombs. Once he was done, the cheese willed him elsewhere. So he fled up the stairs and out a window, leaving a conspicuously cheese wedge-shaped hole in the glass, and some confused gargoyles in his wake. The party later escaped the castle through that hole. Our next story comes from Willem Willis, and he writes, My players almost die fixing a bridge. Some background information. I generally run very difficult encounters, usually downing 1 or 2 players, so I decided to make a simpler challenge that required no combat, just to mix it up. The challenge? A worn-down rope bridge that doesn't look like it will support the players. In reality, it only supports 50 pounds, and there is some timber and rope on the other side. Since our human monk has a magical item that lets him temporarily fly, the idea is that he will fly over to gather the materials, bring them back, and then the party will repair the sour spots one by one. That's your mistake, man. You can't have a built-in solution for your players. They'll never see it, and they'll never take it. However, the barbarian, who weighs 200 pounds, decides to run onto the bridge and check under it for trolls. The planks under him break, and he falls into the river. The paladin decides to try and save him. However, after he dives in, he immediately remembers that he is wearing heavy armor. He immediately sinks to the bottom while the barbarian drifts away. So 2 players are in the water, and one of them is actively drowning. The monk now tries to help the barbarian by lowering his own rope, but the only rope he had is tied into a noose that he uses as a weapon. So instead of grabbing onto the noose, the barbarian uses his hand axes to grab the rocks. He succeeds, but when trying to climb up, he slips back in the river. Bad rolls. The paladin, underwater, is trying to swim up, but the armor is too heavy. He then decides to ditch all of his armor and weapons to swim up. When everyone does get up, they roll to repair the bridge and get a natural 1. So the bridge snaps in half, and the monk and the barbarian fall in again. The encounter went on for so long that I decided to just have the bridge magically fix itself. Okay, I beg your pardon here, but my nerd hackles are up. My nerd hackles are all the way up. Traditionally, in history, it was knights who would be the one to wear their full heavy armor. And the first heavy armor there was were full coat of chainmail. Like, not the chainmail shirt, but like a full coat, as in it comes out to proper sleeves and has a skirt tunicky bit that comes down. And the thing weighed somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 pounds, just the coat itself, and fastens with belt buckle looking things down the front or down the back. Or you put it on and take it off like a shirt, which takes some doing and looks like this.
I've seen some wonderful period images of blokes trying to get out of their male shirts. Go on.
Here we go. Here we go. The years I spent in the asylum.
This is exactly what the pictures show. This is exactly what they show.
Unbelievable.
It is for this reason that traditionally almost every single knight had to have a squire. And what's the squire's first job? Is helping the knight get their stuff on and off. It takes a minute. Later, heavy armor goes from chainmail to plate, which weighs about the same, but has got way more fiddly bits, way more buckles and whatnot. And just what I'm getting at is, as soon as this dude hits the water, he's dead. That stuff isn't coming off. It's not coming off fast enough for him to get out of that water before he loses consciousness. But then again, that's me trying to inject realism into a fantasy game where magic is real, so I digress. Gold Sword 44 writes, "This reminds me of one of my river stories. Here's the first one. 6 players are traveling some hilly woods searching for a bandit camp. They come across a river 140 feet wide, rapids downstream, and a waterfall upstream, which has a large basin that the river feeds from. They decide to swim across. Cleric gets pulled downstream towards the rapids. The ranger scrambles onto a rock, ties a rope into a big loop, rolls a critical fail, and throws it to the cleric to grab, who also rolls a critical fail. The loop lands around the cleric's head, and the ranger begins pulling him in. The poorly made knot slips, tightening around the cleric's neck, and nearly strangles him to death on the way back to the rock. But he passed his constitution saves. During all of this, the rest of the party is dumbstruck and paddling water while they watch. They get to the rapids and begin to panic. Damage is rolled, supplies are lost. Who is furthest downstream is determined to be the sorcerer. The sorcerer remembers he can manipulate a cube of water at will and scoops everyone out of the water after rolling a successful concentration. The ranger sees the fun, waves to the sorcerer, grabs the cleric, and jumps back in to ride the rapids. The sorcerer's jaw drops, and he shouts after them, "I can only do that once a day!" Ranger and cleric are swept downstream, arrive unconscious on the riverside, and are captured by the bandits. I'm not gonna lie, I would love to read this as a story. Like, just this kind of adventure farce would be so much fun to me. If anyone out there would like to write this, I'd be much obliged. Our next story comes from Voidmeyer. Voidmeyer writes, "Traipsing through the forest to find an ancient copper dragon to ask for his support in us starting a new nation on what is essentially his land. We were told that this dragon loved pranks and comedy, and his entire forest was booby-trapped with mostly safe pranks all around. Eventually, after being thoroughly spent searching this forest, my rogue just yells out into nothing, 'Hey! How many dwarves does it take to screw in a light bulb? 11! 1 to hold the bulb, and 10 to drink enough to make the room spin.' The copper dragon blipped into existence and informed the rogue that he was henceforth banned from the use of any and all puns." Alright, this next story is the one that I've been illustrating the whole time. It took a long time. It was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it very much. I hope it was worth the wait, and I hope you enjoy it too. Strap in. Here we go. The story comes from Draconium, and it is called Tarrasques in Love. Now, as a brief aside, I know that it is spelled Tarrasque. Tarrasque, right? However, 13-year-old Gabe did not know that when he originally read the entry in his Monsters Manual way back in 2nd edition. So I've been calling them Tarrasques for most of my life. So Tarrasques. So old habit, not gonna die today. I'm sorry if it bugs you. This is what happens when you learn words from books and not from hearing them with your ears. Draconium writes, "I was DMing for a few friends in 3.5. I had decided to run an apocalyptic scenario for the world, so my friends rolled up a few characters. After we had gotten a bit into the session, they were walking through a forest and ended up at the base of a mountain range. They found a cave and decided to check it out. See if there was anyone or anything in there of interest. At this point, I rolled using a custom apocalyptic encounter chart to determine what they find. I rolled a tarrasque, the hardest creature to roll on the entire chart. For those not in the know, the Tarrasque or Tarrasque is a giant monstrous creature along the size of a Godzilla. And for players, especially from my day, if you find one of those, it's kiss your butt goodbye time. It's just similar to an eldritch horror. The best you can hope for is that it just doesn't notice you, because there's no way you're going to beat this thing. Certainly not below like level 20 or some such. I almost re-rolled, but then decided, why not? So my players went into the cave and stumbled upon the Tarrasque, who was hibernating in the depths of the cave. Now, at this point, I was expecting them to leave it be. They didn't have the power or equipment to handle a tarrasque, and it was deep in slumber anyways. It was my mistake, though. I underestimated just how brave, just how stupid these characters were. They climbed up onto the tarrasque and woke it up. So the tarrasque was now awake, and it was not very happy about it. However, it failed all of the checks needed to notice the players riding on its back. So instead, it broke out of the cave complex and started going on a rampage through the forest. I was hoping the players would take the opportunity to jump off the tarrasque to the safety of the trees. It was charging in a straight line, so if they just jumped off the side, they'd have been good. But the players straight up told me, "We want to see where it's going." So, with a shrug, I had the tarrasque charge through the forest until it hit the coastline of the continent, then jump into the water and start swimming. It just kept swimming in a straight line for a full day and a half. Eventually, they all reached an island in the middle of the ocean. The players were just happy to see land again, but the tarrasque was looking for something at this point. It went straight to an extinct volcanic crater in the middle of the island. At this point, I decided to roll on the encounter chart again and see what was on the island. So I roll another tarrasque. Again, I almost re-rolled, but then I had a brilliant idea. Back in-game, the tarrasque they had been riding on began to let out a call, one that was soon answered by another tarrasque as it came into the character's view. This one slightly smaller than the first, but still fully grown colossal creature. This is when the players learned that in this world there are 2 tarrasques. 1 male, 1 female. Usually, one was only awake at a time. It was rumored that the gods had made it this way so that they could never breed. However, the players had just disrupted that cycle by waking up the female tarrasque, who immediately went out to find her long-lost mate. Following this, I rolled a spot check for the male tarrasque, and he succeeded, spotting the characters on the female's back. He then proceeded to pluck them off and drop them on the ground. The tarrasque pair then took off, leaving the island to go and make some little tarrasque babies. Luckily, all the players made it to the ground in one piece, but unluckily I got to tell them, "Congratulations, you just made the apocalypse worse." And that is the end for this edition of Tales from the Tabletop. I thought that was just some of the best quick thinking I've heard from a DM in a while. Just how to take such improbable random encounters and turn it into something truly hilarious and truly kind of sweet. And that's 100% the humor I'm here for. So to that DM, my deepest and fondest wishes to you. Well done. Bravo. The original Tarrasque, the French legendary creature, I don't believe was supposed to be so large and imposing. I'm not sure how it happened that way in D&D, but I don't care. It's a great monster. I ended up looking up a bunch of different reference material to figure out how I wanted to interpret this one, and what you see is the result. So I hope it works for you. And if you'd like the original art from this episode, it'll be for sale on my store at coffeeandhate.biz. Click store at the top. And in the meantime, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening, and may your dice roll high and never be cursed.